The conference room lights buzzed faintly overhead, a quiet tension vibrating beneath the polished surface of the long table. Screens blinked with quarterly projections, and the scent of burned espresso clung to the corners. I'd been here 100 times before budget reviews, rollout meetings, crisis drills, but this one felt different. The room was too full, too formal. Dax Moreland sat at the head of the table like he owned time itself. I should have seen it coming. The silence before a storm always carries a specific weight. Dax cleared his throat, a theatrical move he'd perfected over the years. "Let's skip ahead," he said smoothly, gesturing to the screen where my name still sat under the title Chief Systems Architect. Effective immediately, Cyrene Halden is no longer with Quantos Logic. There was a soft rustle like a gust of wind through dry leaves. Heads turned. Some avoided eye contact. A few watched intently, hungry for drama. He slid a cream-colored envelope across the glass toward me. "Severance is generous. Legal signed off this morning." I looked at the envelope, then at him, that smug twist in his smile. Dax always did enjoy spectacle, especially when it involved control. For a second, no one spoke. The room was suspended in the kind of silence that usually follows a siren. I stood slowly, not stiff, not angry, just resolved. Unclipping my ID badge, I set it gently beside the envelope. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, and then just as I turned to leave, I paused, pivoted slightly. "I'd suggest you check the Chronocore operations dashboard." Dax blinked. "Excuse me?" I met his gaze directly. "Because in approximately 9 minutes, the entire system is going offline." There it was, the fracture. The moment tension cracked into confusion, he scoffed. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I said, quiet and level. Somewhere down the table, someone opened a laptop. Another bolted for the adjacent server room. Fingers scrambled across keyboards. The HR director paled. I adjusted the strap on my shoulder bag, turned on my heel, and walked out without another word. Behind me, the room erupted into movement. Raised voices, rustling suits, panicked clicks. I didn't look back. By the time the elevator doors closed behind me, I could hear Dax yelling my name down the hallway. Quantos wasn't always glass walls and $400 chairs. When I joined, it was 5 desks shoved into a subleased basement suite that still smelled like printer ink and mold. Dax was charming back then, a founder with empty pockets and grand ideas. He'd stand by the whiteboard scribbling half-sentences and wild arrows while I coded quietly in the corner, turning vaporware promises into something that actually ran. Chronocore wasn't born out of genius. It was born out of necessity. A logistics engine that could predict, reroute, and automate fulfillment across chaotic networks. I built it from the ground up, not just the code, but the architecture, the diagnostic feedback loops, the entire predictive stack. It was brittle at first, then it wasn't. Then it was brilliant. The system made Quantos profitable. It made Dax powerful. For a while, he gave me credit. "Cyrene's the reason we're still breathing," he'd tell investors, smiling like he meant it. And maybe he did once, but things changed. 6 months ago, I noticed something strange. A minor flag when I tried accessing deployment logs. Then again when I checked error reports on the East server node. The permissions hadn't been revoked, just redirected, rerouted. Subtle. Like someone closing doors behind me one by one. At first, I convinced myself it was a mistake. Then I overheard a late-night call while working in the Seattle office. Dax in his glass-walled corner room voice, too loud and too sure. "She's old code. Let's clean house." I stood there holding my coffee invisible to him. I didn't flinch. I didn't confront. I just turned and walked out of the building and into the drizzle, heart thudding like a distant war drum. That night, I sat at my apartment's kitchen counter and stared at the screen, watching the blinking cursor pulse like a warning. They weren't just planning to fire me. They were going to erase me, strip my name from the patents, rebrand the system, rewrite history. So I did the one thing I'd never done before. I wrote code they couldn't see. I didn't build a bomb, I built a firewall with teeth. That night, after hearing Dax call me old code, I opened a fresh module under an innocuous label buried deep beneath the diagnostic stack. I named it Nix Protocol. Just another ghost function inside a system so vast, no one but me ever saw all of it at once. It was elegant in its simplicity. If my access key was revoked, not suspended, not reset, but revoked, the system would interpret it as a hostile event. No damage, no corruption. Just immediate full system lockdown. Everything offline. No bypass, no override, no exceptions. Chrono Core would seal itself like a vault during a fire. The process looked like a memory leak at first glance, just long enough to confuse any junior dev they might toss at it. But within 90 seconds, everything would stall. Front-end dashboards, API calls, internal routing, gone. I didn't tell anyone, not even Maddox from DevSecOps, and we used to finish each other's syntax. This wasn't a vendetta, it was insurance. If they wanted my system without me, they'd have to break it. And breaking it would cost them everything. For months, it just sat there, dormant, silent, invisible. While I watched my authority shrink and my title become ornamental, I kept building acting as if nothing was wrong. That was the hardest part. Pretending I still believed in the company I'd helped raise like a child, even as they quietly started replacing me with brighter, hungrier faces who'd never written a single line of Chrono Core's foundation. The final trigger came last night, an alert, credential revocation. I felt nothing, no panic, no anger, just completion, like closing the last tab on a long day. So when Dax said, "You're done here," I didn't argue. I simply handed over my badge, watched the board blink behind his head, and waited for the countdown to begin. And now, walking down the front steps of Quantos HQ, I slipped my phone from my coat pocket and glanced at the screen. 4 missed calls already, all internal, all ignored. The real calls hadn't come yet, but they would. By the time I reached the end of the block, the first wave hit. Chrono Core's mainframe was synced to global routing nodes. When it went dark, everything downstream followed. Order queues froze mid-execution. Shipment tags went unreadable. Inventory mismatches triggered false stockouts across 6 fulfillment partners. Data began corrupting in live sync, not because it was lost, but because Chrono Core had stopped validating real-time communication. It was like yanking the brain out of a perfectly working body and expecting the limbs to keep moving. My phone buzzed. Dax Mobile. I silenced it. Another vibration. Mark Wells, CTO, ignored. A third. Internal ops, high priority, declined. Instead, I walked 2 blocks north and stepped into a cafe that didn't know my name and didn't care what was burning behind me. The barista smiled. I ordered a lavender tea with honey and sat near the window. Quiet still. Across the street, I could see the Quantos Tower through the trees, all clean steel and glass, now flashing red inside. Floor after floor lights flickered with the rhythm of a company in crisis. Someone inside was probably yelling. Someone was blaming me. Someone was already spinning the press version of what had just happened. But none of that mattered. The tea arrived. I took a slow sip. Sweet floral grounding. My phone lit up again. Dax, this time, leaving a voicemail. Then Mark. Then HR. The messages stacked like kindling. I turned the phone face down. The CTO had once told me Chrono Core was too stable to fail. He meant it as a compliment, but I had warned him, back then stability is just what chaos looks like right before the fall. Across the street, I saw the building's front doors open. 2 executives stumbled out, gesturing frantically into their phones. I recognized the posture, not urgency, but desperation. I finished the tea, tucked a 10 under the cup, and rose without rush. It was only a matter of time before they stopped calling and started showing up. The knock came just after sunset, sharp, impatient, meant to intimidate. I didn't check the peephole. I didn't need to. Only one man knocks like he owns the air you breathe. I opened the door slowly. Dax Moreland stood there, shoulders squared, jaw tight, tie hanging askew. His confidence was cracked at the edges, but not yet broken. He pushed past me before I could say a word the way men like him always do, assuming permission is a formality. "Do you understand what you've done?" he barked, spinning toward me once we were inside. "This is criminal interference. The board is all ready." I held up one hand and walked past him, not bothering to respond. At my desk, I opened my laptop with the ease of muscle memory. A few keystrokes and the dashboard bloomed to life. Every region red, all nodes offline, data integrity locked. I turned the screen toward him. "This," I said calmly, "isn't destruction. It's preservation." He stared at it, blinking fast. "You froze the entire infrastructure." "No," I replied. "The infrastructure froze itself. That's what Chrono Core does when it detects hostile takeover. You revoked my credentials, remember?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, eyes narrowing. "You're bluffing," he said, voice low. "Am I?" I tapped a single key. The console refreshed, showing the escalation flags across Asia, Pacific, Europe, North America. Dozens of clients had already triggered emergency escalations. Some had suspended contracts. One had filed an inquiry with the Federal Trade Commission. "I can undo it," I said. "But not for free." Dax looked at me like he was still in charge. "You're extorting the company?" "I'm enforcing a boundary," I replied. "You don't own me. You never did." He stepped back, rubbing his temples. His voice softened, searching for footing. "Okay, just tell me what you want." I closed the laptop slowly and met his gaze with a steadiness I knew he couldn't match. "We'll talk when you're done pretending this was your idea. Until then, you have no leverage." He didn't argue. He just turned and left, and I knew he wasn't going to be the last one at my door. It wasn't Dax who came back. It was Rachel Kim, the interim COO, and Thomas Leary, lead counsel. They arrived mid-morning with carefully folded expressions and a cardboard box of pastries, like it was a negotiation tactic. We skipped the coffee. Rachel sat straight-backed on my sofa, hands clasped tightly. "Look, Cyrene," she started, "no one's disputing your value, but there are better ways to resolve this than making the entire system stop." I raised a hand, then pointed to my laptop, which was already connected to the Chrono Core crisis map. "That's what resolution looks like right now." Thomas leaned forward, his voice smoother. "We're prepared to offer reinstatement, full public recognition, and a retention package." I tilted my head. "Define reinstatement. Your previous title and compensation." I laughed once quietly. "You think I built the backbone of your global logistics empire and I'll settle for the same cubicle and a thank you email?" They exchanged a glance. "I want my title back, but not as it was." I pulled out a folder and opened it between us. Full CTO reinstatement. 51% ownership of all Chrono Core patents, retroactive and forward. A $12 million payout for attempted removal and breach of intellectual trust. Dax's resignation effective immediately. An assigned public acknowledgement board, media, and shareholders that I'm the sole architect of Chrono Core. Rachel's jaw tensed. "You're asking for more than control. You're asking for blood." "No," I said evenly. "I'm asking for what I built. You mistook the foundation of this company for overhead." Tomas's fingers curled on the edge of his knee. "We'd have to take this back to the board. You do that." Rachel stood. "And if they say no," I closed the folder gently. "Then the system stays offline. And you can explain to every major client why the woman you erased now holds the keys. They left without another word." An hour later, my building's security buzzed my unit to announce 2 more guests. One was from infrastructure, the other was from the board. The call came just after midnight. No caller ID, no voicemail trail, just a clean, clipped voice on the line when I answered. "Ms. Halden, my name is Vincent Kroll. I represent Nyros Holdings." I didn't respond. "We're aware of your situation with Quantos. Our firm holds a significant interest in the company's performance and by extension, Chrono Core." Still, I said nothing. We'd like to acquire the platform, he continued. Not the company, just Chronocore. We're prepared to make a high 9-figure offer. Quietly. No headlines, no fingerprints. I swirled my tea, letting the silence thicken. You're trying to buy something that doesn't belong to you. No, he replied calmly. We're trying to rescue something that was mismanaged. You've made your point. Let's transition it into something more useful for everyone. I hung up without another word. 5 minutes later, the first attack came. I caught it on the monitor while checking server stability, a rapid succession of distributed denial-of-service packets, organized layered bouncing through international proxies. Then came the port scans, credential stuffing, a web of injection attempts so clean it had to be professional. They weren't just probing, they were trying to tear the system open. Chronocore's perimeter defense systems lit up in a spectrum of red and yellow. Auto mitigation kicked in, but the pressure was relentless. Whoever they were, they weren't playing. I activated a set of sandbox traps I'd built years ago, honeypots disguised as outdated firmware. Within seconds, their scripts latched on like moths to flame, feeding me breadcrumbs. The bounce points traced back through leased VPN clusters in Singapore and Frankfurt, but one of them cracked too easily. Zurich, a private server block linked to a shell company, a shell owned by Neros Holdings. That wasn't coincidence. That was declaration. I leaned back in my chair, my hands still steady. They didn't want a deal. They wanted control. And if they couldn't buy it, they'd steal it. But I'd been hunted before, and I never left the door unlocked. I didn't sleep, not out of fear, out of precision. The kind of still calculating clarity that only shows up when your enemies finally reveal their faces. I stayed up tracing packet trails, running anomaly filters, cross-referencing server calls with board meeting timestamps and system credential logs. The breach attempts weren't random. They were tethered to internal IP's leaked access schedules that lined up perfectly with the hours Dax used to review architecture changes. He hadn't just removed me, he'd been feeding backdoors to someone outside. I dug deeper. A directory on a shared staging server hadn't been scrubbed clean. Inside compressed files, redline drafts of a licensing split, trademark applications with my name erased, meeting notes between Dax and a VK complete with timestamps. And then the final nail, a Neros Holdings memo labeled Phase 2. Asset realignment post-termination. I read it twice. Then I compiled everything: logs, memos, routing paths, attack timestamps, metadata, and internal security exceptions. I zipped the entire folder, encrypted it, signed it digitally, and split it 3 ways. One went to the FBI's cyber division, one to the FTC, and the third, beautifully packaged, landed in the inboxes of TechCrunch Bloomberg and 2 investigative reporters I'd met at a cybersecurity conference years ago. No anonymity. No fear. I added a note to each: Chronocore was not breached. It defended itself. The breach came from within. The sabotage is ongoing. If they want war, I'll give them press. Then I hit send and waited. The first headline hit just after dawn. Breaking whistleblower alleges. Internal sabotage at Quantos Logic. FBI opens inquiry. I refreshed the Chronocore incident dashboard. Traffic was slowing. The attacks were still coming, but they were no longer surgical. They were noisy, sloppy, reactionary. Someone on the other side had flinched. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. Not a blocked number this time. Board chair, direct line. The boardroom was full, but no one made small talk. Even the usually smug investor reps sat stiff folders, unopened eyes darting toward the end of the table, where Dax hunched, jaw locked tight, pretending he still had control of the narrative. I didn't sit. I stood beside the wall-mounted display and plugged in my drive. The first slide lit up with attack logs, timestamps, entry vectors, IP chains. Chronocore didn't fail, I said. It activated a containment protocol after my credentials were revoked and automated defense against external compromise. Next slide, the internal staging memos, trademark drafts, ownership redlines with my name replaced, except the compromise wasn't external. Dax shifted in his chair, hands curling into fists. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. I wasn't here to debate. Slide 3, the Nyros Holdings connection. Zurich routing. Transaction records. Meeting notes between Dax and Vincent Kroll. You didn't just try to replace me, I said. You tried to sell off what you didn't understand using access you weren't authorized to hold. Silence. The kind that signals a room full of people recalibrating their allegiances. Board Chair Linwood finally spoke. Mr. Moreland, do you dispute any of this? Dax stood abruptly, arms raised in mock outrage. You can't possibly be taking this. Sit down, I said without raising my voice. He did. The vote was quick, unanimous. Dax Moreland was removed as CEO effective immediately. He didn't speak again as security escorted him from the room, but the glare he shot me as he passed was pure venom. I didn't return it. Instead, I walked to the center of the room, closed my laptop, and looked each board member in the eye. You thought I was just a line of code, I said. Turns out I'm the source. No one argued. By noon, the company had issued an internal memo. I was back CTO board member and now legally co-owner of Chronocore. But the moment I stepped into my new office, a silent alert pinged across my terminal. Unknown scan, foreign address, they weren't done. By the end of the week, the headlines had taken on a rhythm. CTO returns to save Quantos. Whistleblower architect reclaims her throne. The ICE architect inside the mind of Cyrene Halden. I didn't ask for the name, but I understood it. Cold doesn't crack. I moved through the office like someone who had never left, but everything was different now. The silence when I entered a room was no longer avoidance, it was deference. They didn't know whether to respect me or fear me. I didn't give them instructions. I gave them stability. While PR polished narratives and legal tied up Dax's ashes, I rebuilt. Chronocore's new security shell was layered, recursive, and silent. No more shared access trees, no open developer environments. The back end was locked tighter than a war bunker, and I was the only one with the key. Then came the email. No sender, no signature. Just 5 words. Still watching. This isn't over. I didn't react. I didn't forward it. I archived it with a tag only I would recognize. Then I opened the root console. For years, I had resisted building a failsafe that couldn't be reversed. It went against everything I believed about transparency and trust. But that was before. That was when I thought enemies wore badges and sat across from you in meetings. Now I knew better. I activated a new protocol, LockGlass. It tethered core logic operations to a rotating algorithm only I could decrypt, tied to biometric input and atmospheric conditions inside the server room. If someone even tried to simulate my access, the system would seal, purge, and rebuild with a fresh encryption tree. No backups, no overrides, no backdoors, just the system and me. I leaned back, the lines of code still scrolling behind my eyes. They could send more lawyers, more proxies, more Vincent Krolls with hollow smiles and bottomless bank accounts. Let them try. Because this time, they wouldn't find a door to push through. This time, they'd have to burn down the sun.